All right. So we've started recording and I can go ahead and start admitting everybody.
To my knowledge, Amber is also going to be here. So.
Oh, I believe Amber was one of the first persons that logged in.
She's a good buddy.
Okay.
Hi, Kathleen. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Hi, it's good to see you, Catherine. And hi, Anna. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Doing good.
What are we looking at? What is behind you?
It is, oh my gosh, I am totally forgetting the name. It's an Impressionist painting.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Monet, maybe? It's Antibes in the Mediterranean. It's one of the virtual backgrounds that the MFA released earlier in the spring.
Lovely. So I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes since we keep admitting people. All right, I might introduce our speakers while we're waiting for the people to enter from the waiting room. So hi everybody, my name is Catherine West and I want to welcome you to the final event in the Fall 2020 Boston University Archaeology Lecture Series. This semester, for those of you who've been coming regularly, know that our theme has focused on archaeology and communities, and today's conversation is entitled Archaeology and Science Communication. So I am delighted to introduce a number of people. First is my co-host, Mary Clark. And she will be sort of fielding the questions and posting lots of things in the chat for you to reference as we go. I'm also delighted to introduce our three speakers who are all science communicators. So first we have Dr. Anna Goldfield, who received her PhD, some of you know her well, from our archaeology department here at BU in 2017. She's currently the writer and co-host of the Dirt podcast, which you can see featured behind her there on the screen. She's also a featured columnist for Sapiens. Second is Dr. Matt Piscitelli, who was also a Boston University student. He earned his BA with us and went on to get a PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And he's worked both for the National Geographic Society and for Search, which I think you'll tell us more about today, which is a global archaeology consulting firm. And we also have Dr. Briana Pobiner, who comes to us from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, where she leads the Human Origins Program's education and outreach efforts. And she also does her own research on the evolution of the human diet. So welcome to all of you and welcome to all of our guests. I'm going to ask Anna, Matt, and Briana to each introduce themselves very quickly in about 5 minutes. Going in the order you were introduced, so Anna, then Matt, then Briana, and I can remind you if you forget as we go. Then we'll take questions from our audience to start our conversation. So again, you can either post questions as our speakers are talking in the chat, and Mary will keep track of those, or you can raise your hand in the participants list and we'll look out for you and ask you to unmute to ask your question. So again, if you're in the audience, you can see the chat is now open. Mary has already started posting some relevant things there, and feel free to post your questions whenever they occur to you. So Anna, we'll start with you. You can go ahead and share your screen, and we will get started.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, I cannot share screen while other participant is sharing.
It should be all set for you now.
Okay. Yeah, now it likes it. Okay. Well, it's also not showing me. Okay. Share. put that on the desktop. There we go. All right. Gosh, I love Zoom. Okay. Can everyone see what is now shared? Okay, perfect. So, hello. Hi, everybody. So thank you for the introduction, Catherine. That pretty much sums up everything about me. I am a science communicator in a couple of different ways. So my co-host Amber Zambelli and I, Amber's actually here in the audience, hi bud, started the Dirt podcast in 2018 after talking about it for a while. Initially, the idea was to watch the movie 10,000 BC and then yell at it into a microphone. Then we realized we needed a more sustainable model than that. And so we developed and started producing The Dirt, which is a weekly edutainment show, which is kind of a buzzword that I don't love, but it does describe what we do. We bring stories from archaeology and anthropology to an audience of all ages and backgrounds, which means that the way that we package the show is meant to be as accessible as possible. And it's available anywhere that you find your podcasts. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, any of the other ones. If for some reason you happen to find a pod platform that doesn't offer the Dirt podcast, let us know. We want to know so we can get ourselves up there. So Amber and I started the podcast together. We were both sort of between grad school and career at that point. And both of us really, really love archaeology and anthropology and kind of the process of thinking about all of these things. And both of us have much more interest than a single research project could kind of provide. So with The Dirt, we have a wonderful opportunity to research a different topic every week, or even better, learn about a different topic every single week from a guest presenter. We love it when experts come on and can tell us things. And so if you go to thedirtpod.com, you can see all of our back episodes. We now have, as of this week, 118 episodes out, plus a couple sort of 0.5 bonus episodes here and there. And each episode tackles a different time or place or topic. We try to be as evenly distributed around the globe and around the sort of the time scale of the human story. We try to disperse our output as much along those two axes as we can, and we have a lot of fun with it. And so yeah, we've done everything from the history of dog domestication to archaeological coprolites, so poop in the archaeological record. We've done, as you can see here, we've done underwater archaeology and shipwrecks. We've talked about the time when the Sahara was actually a lush green rainforested area. So we cover as much as we can, and we package those stories so that they are fun, engaging, and that they also lay down the baseline of the science and the research that goes into each of those topics. So our big goals for The Dirt are especially to provide platforms for either early career researchers or other people who have research projects that they really want to talk about, to provide a platform for those people. So we love having guests on. We love having guest interviews. We do a lot of outreach just in general, just sort of not only sharing the episodes that we do. Oh, there goes my cat trying to get into the cabinets. Cool. We share a lot of research and try to boost other people's signals via social media. And we also respond to listener emails. We love getting input from listeners who ask questions, and we can kind of do some research and get back to them. That's been some really fun aspects of this project. And we also have this amazing community of listeners now that somehow, it's still kind of a mystery to me, but people give us money. People I don't know give us money each month on Patreon to support what we do, because they like what we do, and because they also get access to monthly bonus episodes on Patreon. So one thing that we're really excited to do, because finally, so the dirt's been around for 2 years now, and what we are starting to do now that we are growing our listener base and growing our Patreon support, we are starting to reach the point where we can start becoming a source of mutual aid. So we're already currently diverting a portion of our Patreon funds to the Black Trowel Collective, which is an organization started pretty recently by Louis Bork and others to support specifically Black archaeologists or people of color who are archaeologists, and to enable them to ask for these micro grants to either get them to a conference or to even just kind of support themselves as they look for jobs during a pandemic. You know, it's a good time to be engaged in mutual aid. And what we are working towards coming soon is we hope to be able to support our own small grants for early career archaeologists, things like getting people to conferences, covering plane tickets and room and board, so that people who may not otherwise be able to get to a conference and consequently have that benefit of putting that on their CV can do that and sort of help to further their career development. And then finally, I'll wrap up here. I also, outside of the dirt and outside of my day job, I also, which incidentally, I'm a professor in the anthropology department at Cosumnes River College in Sacramento. That's less science communication than this stuff. So I also write for Sapiens, which is a wonderful online journal and covers everything anthropological. And I specifically write about a couple things. One is kind of anthropological research in general and the experience of the anthropological researcher, kind of combining those two things. But then also, since my dissertation research and my sort of general wheelhouse is Neanderthals and early human evolutions, this is a project that came out last year that I'm extremely proud of, and it's a head-to-toe tour of the Neanderthals. So the graphic that you see on the left, if you actually go to the page on Sapiens, it's an interactive clickable graphic. And so every one of those points leads you to an article that I wrote about a certain part, well, a corresponding part of the Neanderthal anatomy and what it tells us about Neanderthals, what it tells us about differences or similarities between Neanderthals and modern humans, and more kind of most importantly, even how we know what we know about those things that the research points out. So explaining not only what the research says, but how the research says that. And of course, it's also lawnmower o'clock. I'm so sorry, everybody. It's just like perfect storm of apartment noises. But that wraps it up for me. So I will stop sharing my screen. And we can move to Matt. Did I do it right?
Yes.
Is that
Thank you.
correct?
Thank you so much, Anna. We can, now that you've unshared, Matt, you can go ahead and share your screen and introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. Could everyone see? I assume yes. So thank you once again. It's a pleasure being here with you all. It's an honor, in fact, to be among such amazing scientists and storytellers like Anna and Briana, and to have this conversation about science communication. As Catherine mentioned, I'm a principal investigator and social media manager for Search, one of the nation's leading cultural resource management firms. And while thinking about my role as a science communicator, it's hard to separate what I currently do from where I come from, because it's my past experiences that have shaped me and motivated me to focus on sharing my passion for the past for others. Like so many of us, I grew up a curious kid with a passion for museums and dinosaurs. Wandering around those glass cases and dioramas, I imagined what it was like to travel back in time, to live amongst ancient peoples. I was fortunate enough to step into that time machine through archaeology, spending years doing academic research in Peru, investigating some of the earliest ceremonial architecture in the Americas. And while I was, exploring those 5,000-year-old pyramids, like what you see here, and temples, as part of my own research projects, I became acutely aware of the importance of funding, Anna sort of mentioned a bit about funding and how that's transformed her journey, if you will. And of course, funding is nothing new, and the importance of it is nothing new to any scientist. But as I was combing the internet listservs and grant portals, I was amazed at how each of those applications I was filling out was asking for something slightly different. And I became more and more aware of the importance of audience. And when I was doing my own research, I was incredibly diversified with my funding sources, experimenting with crowdfunding, giving talks to donors. Volunteer talks turned to speaking engagements and invited lectures. And these opportunities eventually opened doors, and I landed at National Geographic Society as a program officer on their grants team. There at Nat Geo, I was able to rub shoulders with some of the best science communicators in the business, and I got to see a media machine really up close and personal. I eventually moved from the DC area and migrated here to where I am now in Minnesota, where I was hired by Search. And what was particularly attractive about Search to me was not just their commitment to checking boxes for clients who need permission to construct a building or a pipeline, but we're committed to responsibly moving beyond grade literature to share the human stories that we uncover every day with the public. I'm actually part of at Search, the only CRM company that produces its own media. We do documentaries like TV shows like Drain the Oceans on National Geographic. I'm also able to work on more exploratory projects. For example, in partnership with a marine robotics company, Ocean Infinity. Earlier this year, we discovered the USS Nevada, which is an iconic World War II battleship, not something your typical CRM firm is doing. Our work is frequented and seen in TV and places like 60 Minutes, who recently featured Search in our role in the story of Clotilda, which was the last ship to bring enslaved persons to the US. So in my role at Search, I'm in that sort of documentary media. I do special projects, but then I also help build the marketing infrastructure for the company. So I manage our social media, and I help create print and digital assets to share who we are and what we do. Assets that typically a CRM company wouldn't So at Search, I help build assets like that to communicate the importance of archaeology in more of a private consulting realm, more so than the academic research realms that Anna and Briana tend to work with. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Who knew a Munsell book could be so dramatic? That was amazing. Thanks, Matt. Briana, go ahead and share your screen and introduce yourself, and then we can turn to the questions.
That sounds good. And you totally stole my wow, the drama of a Munsell book. I would never suggest, imagine that. Okay, let me share my screen. This and there. Are you seeing full screen slides? Sweet. Okay, so it is also a pleasure to be here with Anna and Matt, and I'll tell you a little bit about the various kinds of science communication that I do in my role at the Natural History Museum. So I wanted to put this slide up first because I'm also a researcher. So part of my role in the Human Origins program at the Smithsonian involves doing research on the evolution of human diet. So I study collections in museums, which you can see in the middle. That's actually me studying the original Turconaboy, which was incredibly thrilling. On the right-hand side is a picture of me at a prehistoric site in Kenya called Olorgesailie, where I've been working for quite a while. So I still go out to the field and do field work and research, and it's really part of what I love about what I do. So one of the things that I do is that I run 2 social media accounts for the Smithsonian's Human Origins program. These 2 accounts, so Facebook and Twitter, and these are just screen grabs from yesterday or the day before. they were launched right around the time that our permanent exhibit on human evolution opened. So I was part of the team. I really was recruited to start working at the Natural History Museum to help put together a permanent exhibit on human evolution, the Hall of Human Origins, which opened in 2010. I did not have any experience in exhibit development, in museum education, in anything like that. I was finishing up my PhD, but I thought, well, this sounds like a really interesting opportunity, and I had always really been interested in public engagement with science. So I started at the Smithsonian as a pre-doctoral fellow. My fellowship turned into a postdoc. My postdoc turned into a permanent position. So I feel very fortunate about that. So part of my role is to be the anonymous, now you all know, person behind the Human Origins Program social media accounts. I also joined Twitter about 2 weeks ago as myself at Briana Pobiner. So it's fun to also step into the Twitter sphere as an actual human. But I spend a lot of my time doing both direct and indirect public engagement. So what does that mean? So I am a scientist. And so as a scientist, I participate in public events at the museum. So this photo is from I was involved in a virtual program or an online program before everything went virtual in March. This was several years ago. And part of that virtual program, which was for a middle school target audience, was actually some, engagement in our one of our hands-on spaces at the Natural History Museum. So I do that as a scientist, but I also do that as a facilitator. And so I run a public program series that's right in the Hall of Human Origins at the Smithsonian. One of those programs is a Scientist is In program, which in the before times when the museum was open was twice a month. And it was just getting scientists with objects on a cart chatting with visitors. So informal, really conversational. The second program is called our Hot Topic program, and HOT stands for Human Origins Today. And that program runs once a month. We have been able to transition that one virtual. And that's where it's also in the museum, particularly, it was relatively informal. It was also an expert chatting with visitors for, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then having the rest of that hour time be kind of a conversation and question and answer session. It's a little bit more formal online with slides and that kind of presentation, but we really try to devote as much time to question, conversation, and interaction as we can. So I do that for the Human Origins Program, but I'm also involved at the museum in larger education, like program planning. So sometimes I'll work with our school programs team, or I'll work with the adult programs team, or just work on programs outside of my area of content expertise. I also spend time doing volunteer training. So really the frontline folks in our museum are our exhibit volunteers. We recruited a group of 120 of them when our exhibit opened in 2010. And we have done a few recruitments since then. And so I'm involved, I lead all of the content training, and we have pretty regular meetings with our museum exhibit volunteers for the Hall of Human Origins. And so we have a journal club, essentially, where we usually once a month get together and read an article. We also do ongoing professional development for our volunteers. So I'm involved with the larger volunteer training group. So that's kind of indirect public engagement. I'm also involved with a few science education partnerships. This is one that is recent and really exciting to me, as because I've been doing scientific research in Kenya on human origins for about 20 years. So I'm working in collaboration with the National Museums of Kenya Education Department to develop a new human evolution school program. They approached the Smithsonian looking for expertise in how to do more interactive programs. So these are photos from last year, I guess, earlier this year in January, when we did sort of a test run of a part of a program with some of their educators and docents. And so this was really fun. I also started recently doing, well, maybe not so recently anymore, almost 10 years ago, doing science education research. And so this is a picture of me as opposed to the teachers that I'm working with, just for kind of, making sure I'm not sharing images that aren't meant to be shared. But I am on now my second National Science Foundation funded project, which is studying the teaching and learning of evolution in US high school biology classrooms. And the main hypothesis of the project is that actually human evolution is a great way to teach core foundation evolutionary principles to high school biology students. There's been a decent amount of research on this with college students, but there hadn't been much with high school students. And so we've developed some curriculum materials that use examples of modern human adaptations, look at human phylogeny, as well as a resource to help teachers in communities where it may be less comfortable just talking or teaching about evolution in general and human evolution specifically. I'm also particularly interested in the science religion conversation space and how to kind of facilitate positive dialogue around those issues. I'm currently one of 15 fellows in the Sinai and Synapses program, which is a group of educators, scientists, religious folks that all come together and kind of figure out how to elevate the discourse on science and religion. I think that's the end. I will stop sharing. That's just kind of a taste of what I do.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. So I have been peppering the chat with some questions as I hear you talk and things that I've been thinking about. There's a couple little responses. I don't know if any of the participants have raised their hands, but I'm going to turn it over to Mary, and maybe you can decide where we're going to start for our first question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. So I don't see any hands raised. I'm just making sure I didn't miss something. All right, so I can actually just get us started with your first question, Catherine, for Anna. So Anna, for our students interested in more popular writing, we kind of wanted to kind of get a good idea of how you started to get involved with Sapiens, because looking at the Sapiens profile, like they actually have undergraduate students writing about their field experiences, as well as well-established professors writing about important topics. And I would love to hear how you got started with that. And I've been wanting to kind of curate assignments so that they model those assignments. So it would be really interesting to see how that can make an immediate transition for our students.
Sure. I mean, it's for me specifically, the work I do at Sapiens was a combination of having something already in my wheelhouse and dumb luck. The timing really worked out. I was in my last year of grad school trying to finish up my dissertation, and Sapiens put out a call. They were just starting out. They put out a call for, like, are you an anthropologist doing research? Do you want to write about some aspect of anthropology or archaeology? And I applied. I sent in a writing sample. I've always really enjoyed writing. Since working at Sapiens, I've gotten a lot better at writing for a wide audience rather than I had to sort of unlearn academic writing. But yeah, I sent in a writing sample. They liked it. And now I write for them. So yeah, I guess put yourself on listservs or follow accounts of the types of venues where you want to be featured. Follow the types of writers whose work you admire. And just, I guess, always be on the lookout for those types of opportunities. Because really, it just showed up in my inbox. And I said, yes, I do want to do that. So it's not a more nuanced answer than that. Sorry.
No, I think that's great. And Meredith Langlet's just added into chat a link to sapiens.org with essentially the application to start writing for them.
Yeah. And they even they have poetry. They will feature poetry. So if you want to kind of flex a different kind of creative part of anthropological writing, they have some really amazing offerings. So they're very open to, like, you can pitch things to the staff at Sapiens, and they're really cool. Just a lot of cool people.
Go ahead, Matt.
I'm going to ask a question because I've always been a fan of Sapiens, Anna, and your work there, and just the whole platform in general. And it's always been sort of a fascination of mine, being able, for folks who can write for a general audience, right? Like articles that we compose are very formulaic and you only need to read the beginning and the end or just the abstract to understand the whole thing. But, you know, it's cryptic and whatnot. And so the idea of writing about an anthropological topic that's relevant today and for a certain audience is very attractive. But I'm curious, could you maybe tell a bit more about sort of what the audience for Sapiens has been, you know, understanding that it's written for a general audience? Have you guys capitalized on that audience? Have you reached folks that aren't anthropologists or aren't interested in archaeology already? Because that's sort of something I've always struggled with, and this is for a broader conversation, is how to get beyond the choir, right? How to reach folks who aren't normally thinking about these things. And I'm curious if Sapiens has been able to reach that, and how so.
I think so. And I think a lot of it is because many pieces for Sapiens, a couple that I've written. So my pieces for Sapiens generally are a little bit more focused into topics within archaeology and anthropology. And yes, to some extent, I am kind of talking about Neanderthals to a choir full of Neanderthal enjoying people. But I try to do so in a way that doesn't necessarily exclude anyone who might not have background knowledge about Neanderthals. But for less focused things, I have written a few pieces that are more broadly applicable to some aspect of the human experience. And I really find that those are the ones that get traction with people who might not necessarily consider anthropology like the first thing that they look to when they're thinking about interesting things to read or sort of thought pieces. But if it's something like, so the most recent piece that I wrote comes from the fact that I think about food constantly. And it's a big part of my dissertation, but also just really like food. And thinking about how this year holiday dinners, you know, are going to look different because families are separate and all of the things related to the global pandemic. And so I walked that thought backwards to thinking about comfort food and thinking about things that are taste experiences or food experiences that remind us of home. And then, because the other thing I think about all the time is what people were doing in the past, kind of combined those two aspects to think about what comfort food, that idea might have meant as far back in the past as I could kind of provide evidence for. And so that was what the whole piece ended up being. And so by taking something much more universal and then focusing in on a connection between that universal human experience and something that touches on that from archaeology or from anthropology has been, I found, an effective tool to kind of lure people in. Sounds kind of like I'm like cartoon villainy, but like that's really kind of the hook, is to start broad and universal and then say, have you ever thought about the idea that people were feeling this same way 10,000 years ago? Isn't that wild? And usually people who hadn't been thinking that will go, and keep reading. So, I mean, that's my hope anyway.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got a couple of really great big questions that encompass everybody. So if you guys are up for it,
also raising her hand, Mary.
Sorry.
To that, Briana.
Oh yeah, I was just going to follow up and you know, Anna, you got to in the end what I was thinking of. So I'm on the advisory board for Sapiens. I think it's a fantastic outlet. And I think the idea of how do we take things that people care about or our universal experiences and like, how does that connect to anthropology or archaeology? I think that's instead of thinking about, I have an idea, you know, stemming from my discipline, but what's something that probably lots of people can relate to, and how can I infuse that with the stuff that comes from my content? So yeah, it's just kind of flipping where you start in a sense.
Go ahead, Matt.
To piggyback on what Briana just said, which always, I occasionally give these storytelling boot camps where you kind of go through some skills that you know, writing, public speaking, photography, and, you know, crash courses. And I remember at one of them, I charged the group with, they were archaeology educators, and I charged them with the idea of presenting to a group about why archaeology matters, right? Which is the big question. Why should we care? And I said very explicitly at the beginning, don't say because we need to learn from the past to inform the future, which is what's in every textbook and what everyone rattles off. And it's true. And I was amazed at the different responses that people came up with when they think about why it matters to you, right? Like, get personal, like what is your personal experience? And there was an individual who talked about how archaeology helped them. They had a learning disability, but archaeology was the only way in which they can kind of succeed in the classroom in a way. Other folks talked about grandparents who were collectors or what have you. And it was these incredibly personal stories about why archaeology matters. And people were brought to tears because we got beyond the sort of, we should care because we should care, but relating it to an actual experience and something lived. Because that's sort of how you hit home.
That's great. We've got some awesome questions coming in, and you sort of touched on one of them, Matt. So Carmen was asking if you guys had some recommendations about publications on storytelling, or maybe tutorials or resources on communication techniques. And Carmen, she states that I run an archaeology divulgation account on Twitter at Carmen Cesaris, and I'd find it inspiring. Thank you very much in advance. So do you guys have any recommendations on that literature or ways of going about it? I know I've seen recently that, sorry, I'm just stepping on you guys, but that the Wenegren and Sapiens and Society of Black Archaeologists have this writing program, this like writing in science communication program, but I'm not sure if I know of anything beyond that one.
I know Sapiens has hosted at least one workshop. Nicola Jones, who's an editor that I work with, has led some how to do science writing for not science audience. And trying to think of books or John McPhee is a good author to follow. He has a book called, oh no, draft number 4, possibly draft number 5. Mary, if you want to save me with Google.
I'm sleuthing.
Thank you. But it's a good book about his writing process, and he's a prolific kind of nonfiction author. As soon as I started expressing an interest in science communication and science writing, my parents just like heaped books on me. They were like, "We will support you with books." So that was great.
So I like that someone put Skype a scientist in the chat. I think that's a great low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
And they give you a little bit of coaching. It's not like one-on-one, but I think that's a good opportunity. A lot of professional society conferences, more and more, are having science communication, training workshops or something during the conference. So if you have the opportunity to sign up for something like that, I was just pulling up, I taught a science communication course, graduate course. So I'm also associate research professor at George Washington University. So I taught a SciComm course last year for the first time to graduate students. And I loved the course. I think they had a good time too. And so I was pulling up my syllabus to see if I could recommend anything in particular. We didn't have books on there. It was a combination of reading the actual research literature about how to do good science communication with also some more informal articles. But I think it's Randy Olson's book that's called Don't Be Such a Scientist, which has some good practical tips about science communication. There's probably a few more that I'll come up with as soon as this call is over, but I'm happy to send a list of books. And if I was in my office in the museum, which I am not, I am home, I could pull a few right off my shelf.
I would just Google.
Yeah.
Because it's funny because as much as, you think of this stuff as a secret sauce, emulating people who are successful, like listening, you don't know how to do a podcast, listen to Anna. If you don't know how to talk about human evolution, try finding Briana and going to a lecture of hers or something. It's finding models to emulate, but then the skills that science communication involves they cross-cut disciplines. So public speaking for business has a lot of similar sort of techniques as for archaeology or any other science. So it's really, you can Google your way through a lot. I don't mean to reveal behind the curtain, but
no, it's true. I agree. And I think some of it, I would say if there's a specific sort of medium that is more comfortable to you, if it's writing, then try your hand at writing, like maybe pitch something to Sapiens. If it's speaking, just, contact somebody who runs a podcast and say, hey, I'm interested in, coming on your podcast as a guest. So I think some of it is kind of figuring out where your comfort zone is, starting in a place that is more comfortable. One of the things that I do is I keep a running Google Doc of things like really good analogies or phrases that I might want to drop into, when I'm doing science communication. And so I think as you're also watching and listening to people that are doing this, that are doing it well, getting a sense for you of like, what do I really like about this? Why is that person such a good science communicator? So like Matt said, there are some basic sort of tips and tricks, but a lot of it really, it's not astrophysics, I guess. Is that the new rocket science? The old rocket science?
That way with anything in physics, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think there's another theme that's kind of coming through some of the questions, and it seems to be also coming into your guys' responses, and that seems to be sort of surrounding your audience and identifying your audience and knowing who you're speaking to, be it tweens, teens, or peers. And I'm sort of wondering if you guys in your writing sort of speak to try to kind of hit multiple audiences, or if you guys target one. And another question that we had was how your work has shifted or changed or needed to respond to our current circumstances in the pandemic. And so I guess it's a little open-ended, but really it's about, if it's science communication, who are you guys sort of designing your work to communicate with, and how do you reach that audience efficiently?
I seem to be the only one who has unmuted myself, so I'll go ahead. I think specifically for the dirt, a big part of at least what I try to bring to the show, and I think Amber and I have been doing this long enough that I can say that we're in agreement about this, is to make this fun. Because one of the things that can really kill someone's interest is when information is presented in a dry way, or just as sort of someone reading a story that doesn't really grab you. So the idea that academia can be fun, can have a sense of humor, doesn't have to take itself too seriously, but still be scientifically rigorous. We can take a pause from explaining how electrical resistivity works to make a dumb joke. Kind of that back and forth between the science and the goof has been a really valuable thing for us, like instilling humor into it. And in writing, instead of necessarily dumb goofs, maybe just sort of bringing in not even necessarily jokes, but moments of, hi, me, the writer, I am a scientist, but also a human with feelings and experiences also. Let us connect and talk about things that I love because I'm excited about these things, and I really want you to be excited about these things too because I love them, and aren't they cool? So if that's sort of the vibe and that's sort of the energy that I can put into the things I produce, because that's the sort of thing that I want if I'm being, if I were to listen to let's say an astrophysics podcast. Haven't thought about listening to one before now. Maybe I will. I don't know. But I would want it to be a fun one who, with jokes to kind of break up the parts where I don't understand things. Just sort of, I don't want a podcast or a source of media that I'm consuming to talk down to me. That doesn't feel great. But I do want to be treated like a fellow human to whom the writer or the producer of whatever content is trying to convey information that brings them joy in some way. So like bringing fun and joy and excitement and like, aren't humans cool, into everything that we do at the Dirt, and to some extent toned down a little bit, but to some extent in my Sapiens writing is a big part of sort of my like personal brand. But Briana, Matt.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say the idea of audience is just so incredible important in my mind. As a social media manager, we're active on 3 platforms, right? Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. The people who consume the media on each one of those are entirely different, right? So the audience on Facebook for us, 50,000 people who are kind of interested in archaeology, but may not be professional archaeologists. LinkedIn is purely people who are there to network. And Instagram is kind of a combination of both, but obviously the medium is totally different. And so we have to cater our posts and our captions appropriately for those different audiences. And if we don't, and if we kind of plug and play similar captions and posts, they're not successful. And so recognizing an audience is always going to be important. But then at the same time, once again, I'm not as prolific as an academic as my 2 colleagues here, or even our 2 co-hosts as well. And I remember just thinking, reading academic articles and sort of, they're not always easy to understand. And sometimes it's hard to admit to yourself that you may not understand what they're talking about. And so, whenever I did my even academic writing, or when I gave professional talks, even if they were at a conference versus a general public talk, they were always at a consistent level. And Briana would know better, like what is the kind of textbooks and things like that. There's a certain reading level, right? And I always felt comfortable at that level, talking to my grandmother or something like that, so that it's, I can explain to them what I'm talking about so that there's no ambiguity, or if there is, they're comfortable asking that question. And so, on one hand, I'm telling you, on social media, audience is important and you got to sort of ramp and cater. But at the same time, I feel like in some of the other things we do, a basic understanding of, let me tell you what this means, without throwing in too much jargon or dumbing it down too much. As Anna was saying, you don't want a podcast that says, rocks are, look like this. But finding that consistent balance is also sort of appealing as well. So certain things you kind of ramp up and cater to an audience, but at the same time, you like to keep some sort of medium. That's sort of what I've found.
I know there's a few more questions. So the only thing I'll add to this is that I agree that audience is first and foremost. Like when I'm talking to a group of preschoolers, it's very different than if I'm lecturing in my GW class, or if I'm talking to, a family in the museum. And so figuring out some baseline idea of how complex language might be understandable, what kind of phrases even some physical things like crouching down and showing kids like things that you're there are some like basic techniques in how you can interact with different audiences. And a lot of that, like Matt said, like that's easily findable just by doing some Google searches or looking in some like science communication. There are science communication journals out there. So that's another place to look.
And to sort of, Briana brought up a good point about sort of your body language. Educators, right? I don't think we ever give enough credit to teachers. And teachers, no offense to college professors, teachers are doing something, education is not the same as lecturing. And if you want to know how to reach kids, you remember your 3rd grade teacher, your 2nd grade teacher. Learn from teachers. They have it down. They've of course gone to school for it, but they can teach you things that science communicators may not be able to.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure we hit on a question that it seems that a lot of people are responding to. So Robin Cutright asks you guys as a group, How do you walk the line between making archaeology compelling and engaging to the public, and the broad overdramatic generalizations of the stereotypical sort of History Channel style approach to public archaeology?
Oh, we don't have the budget for dramatic reconstructions, so I think that takes care of it for us. No, I just oftentimes, in fact, just about every time, the story itself that we're telling, we try to, it's usually compelling enough on its own, or the types of research used are cool enough on their own that we can be excited about it and talk about it in a way that doesn't need maybe what the History Channel producers are pushing on the show. But we try to let the story, or tangential things coming off the story, speak for themselves.
Matt, you look like you want to jump in, maybe, and then I'll go after you.
I'm sort of thinking like experiences in media, right, and thinking about TV production and how it works. The most successful archaeology programs in history have been led by guys named Josh, right? Like Josh Bernstein and Josh Gates, right? Two Joshes, neither of which are archaeologists. But they've captured in their own way sort of a certain formula that I've seen in television shows and on the production side in archaeology forever. And largely it comes down to what's the mystery, right, that you're trying to solve, what's your question, what's the narrative to get there, like Anna was saying, sort of, what's that journey? May not always matter if you get there at the end, right? Zahi Hawass never found those golden mummies at the end of his documentary, but it's about getting there. So there's a question and a mystery, and nowadays it's things like technology, right? Technology uncovering the past is attractive. And that's basically it, right? Like that's the formula that you see kind of rehashed different ways. What I am seeing though is that in the network television, that's what you see. And you see those shows that are a little bit, that we cringe at. We're always gonna, as scholars, we're always gonna cringe at certain things, right? So there's certain words, civilization, ancient civilization, lost civilization.
Aliens.
Kind of cringe at, but frankly, you gotta get over because you're gonna reach an audience, right? So that's what your grandma knows. So there's certain terms you cringe, but kind of go beyond it, and you kind of draw your line. But what I'm seeing now with things like Netflix, they're going in and taking risks that a History Channel, which will cater to more of a reality TV show audience, or even like a National Geographic wouldn't. And right, and so there's actually a good show on Netflix, Secrets of Saqqara. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it was it followed sort of an Egyptian excavation, all Egyptians. There was sort of a thread of tension there because they were trying to find a big discovery before their funding runs out. But it was kind of quick and dirty, but it had a local perspective. It talked about the generational sort of involvement in the archaeology. I've never seen films like that or sort of TV shows like that where it's a little bit more realistic. And it's my hope that those become more successful because they're a more realistic view of archaeology. I'm also excited for The Dig. What's the Ralph Fiennes movie coming out, where archaeology is kind of part of a romantic story. I have a feeling archaeology is kind of going to get pushed to the side for the romance, which is fine, but it's not Indiana Jones, which is really comforting to see that sort of moving beyond that formula and trope. And so to the question of how do you draw the line, is you kind of get over yourself to a degree, but at the same time, maintain your integrity.
Yeah.
All right, Briana, did you want to add anything to that? Are you good?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I wanted to kind of get us thinking about, and that kind of, Matt, leads me nicely into this sort of wrap up. But I really wanted to kind of see what you guys are seeing as the future of science communication, and sort of how what you're doing now is kind of moving into whatever you think or you see as the next steps in science communication. And so there's all these different modes, ArcGIS story maps, podcasts, television shows, and all these nice sort of interactive modes that can be added to social media and personal websites and so forth. And so I just kind of wanted to see what you guys are seeing as your next steps, or what the future of public communication is surrounding archaeology.
I'll go.
Too tough, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So archaeology, one of my favorite things about archaeology and anthropology more broadly is that it is a discipline that can take approaches to questions from pretty much any other discipline. And I think the same thing applies to communicating archaeology, in that everything new that has started to become a way of communicating science in general can be used for archaeology. And so there's all kinds of possibilities within, for YouTube, or for bringing in, if Netflix is starting to take archaeology a little more seriously, then maybe there will be more things like that. It's I don't think there's anything that can't be anything in the scope of communicating to broad audiences that can't be used for archaeology. And I think combinations of those things now are what's going to start really making a difference. So maybe a podcast that turns into a YouTube show and then turns into a Netflix series. Maybe. We're not working towards that, but that would be cool. But just sort of building on multiple platforms and having a podcast that has social media accounts. And so saying, listeners, if you want to contact us, you can do it in any number of, making us seem accessible, making us seem like we're not just some kind of remote ivory tower talking heads, right? So combinations of media that not only put what you want to say out there, but also allow some kind of dialogue, I think is really, really, really important, because a big part of science communication and science education is being able to respond to questions of, but what about this? Or how do we know it wasn't this explanation? Or for people who say, how do we know it wasn't aliens? Instead of just shutting them down on Twitter, here's a list of helpful links of, since you seem to really enjoy watching YouTube videos, here are a number of valid archaeologists telling you things and showing you why these things are the way they are on YouTube. So being able to point people towards resources. If you need to explain to your grandma that giants didn't build those mounds, you can point her towards something she can click, or something someone can tell her on a radio show. It's just having all of these resources. It's not just finding an article to read. I think that becoming kind of not multidisciplinary, but multimedia disciplinary for a single creator of archaeology content is, I think, really what's going to be valuable moving forward. Augmented reality stuff is going to start being really cool. I've seen some talk of museum exhibits developing augmented reality portions of their exhibit. And Briana, can I shout out your work with the skulls? And
yes, please.
Yeah,
thank you.
That's a great segue, because Briana's been working on something really cool at the Smithsonian, and it makes me so happy.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So we've had for a while 3D rotatable scans of a bunch of hominin skulls and prehistoric artifacts on the Human Origins website, which is humanorigins.si.edu. But they're Flash-based, and we've been migrating them to the Smithsonian's 3D platform so that they will not die when Flash stops being supported this month. So it's been months and months in the making, but we finally launched them on the Smithsonian's 3D platform. And lots of teachers and faculty are like, finally, we can use these again. Yeah. So
as someone who's teaching lab remotely.
Yeah. So I was really hoping to be able to like do this in the summer, but it just took a lot longer. But I wanted to follow up, one of the things, Mary, when you asked your question, for me, I think, the silver lining of the sort of democratization of information on the internet is that scientists are on Twitter. And like you can chat with an actual archaeologist, even if you can't do it in person. You can, the idea that there are lots and lots of experts and students and just folks that you can have Twitter conversations with, as opposed to like organizations, but like individual people. And I think there's something really, it's a different level of interaction when you're doing it with just a person. That's why we try to do a lot of programs at the National History Museum where it's like a scientist chatting with visitors, because that's the most important opportunity to be able to ask questions, to be able to get your, thoughts and fears and ideas all validated. Even if you're like, I don't think that is how it happened, but here's how we might find out. And here's where you can look, like Anna was saying, that, it's somebody who is listening to you. And so I think the idea of having like, archaeologists are humans too, and being able to interact with them is important.
And I will get back on that train and say, sort of the future, and this is kind of a reflection of audience as well, but going to your audience, becoming accessible. It's like the celebrity phenomenon, more and more celebrities. Here's my life, here's an Instagram story. Doing that as a scientist is challenging, and rewarding, because you're opening the door to what people thought was something like I never understood. Being first and playing with those platforms is important. So being that first archaeologist on TikTok, don't really know if there are any out there, is like, that's how you get your following. And then you kind of carry it forward from there. It's definitely something where people are going. And also it sort of breaks the mold. My greatest fear is the archaeology demographic. Who's interested in the field outside the field is aging, right? Is aging. And so how do you reach a younger audience? Well, going to them via their platforms is one way. Education, I remember when I was a grant officer, I loved what Briana and her group does, and sort of getting archaeology into a classroom at the same level of geography being taught everywhere, because that's what archaeology is. It's a multidisciplinary science. Getting it into the classroom will help that demographic, because you learned it in school and you're going to take that with you forever, and you'll remember it for better or for worse for the rest of your life. It's not something you only get in college. And then I think the other trend, or the last trend, is rewarding science communication. I don't think still academia rewards the type of public outreach that is necessary for us to survive anymore. I think that needs to change. I think it will change, particularly in the light of a pandemic and sort of where things are going. And I do know certain peer-reviewed journals that are emerging very soon, next year, 2021 perhaps, that is exactly focusing on that, the impact of archaeology on people's lives for a more popular audience. So those are my three bits: going to the audience, education, getting archaeology in the classroom, and rewarding public outreach.
Thank you, Matt. That was the perfect place to end. I'd asked a question earlier about academia and the fact that we don't get rewarded for doing the kind of work that you're all doing so incredibly well. And where can we move forward? I'm hearing a lot about how we can move forward effectively now, and hopefully our colleagues and elders will start to recognize the importance of all of this. So thank you to all of you. We've reached past our time. This is such a great conversation. You're all clearly brilliant at what you do. There is so much more that we could be asking and learning from you. So we have recorded this event with the permission of our participants. It will be available on our Eventbrite site with the chat resources. So anything that Mary posted there, all the questions that were asked will be available, and the contact information for Briana, Anna, and Matt will also be there. And please stay tuned after our long winter break for our upcoming events in the spring of 2021 through the Archaeology Lecture Series. And thank you all for coming. Thank you guys for coming and sharing your work with us. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks for having us.